David and Linda Patterson could never have imagined that their peaceful Tuesday morning in September 1998 would mark the beginning of a 2-decade journey through hell that would test every fiber of their being and reshape their understanding of hope, love, and perseverance. Their 6-year-old son, Timothy, had been playing contentedly in the sandbox that David had constructed just 3 weeks earlier in their front yard, using premium-treated lumber and the finest playground sand available at Morrison's hardware store in their Phoenix, Arizona neighborhood. The sandbox was positioned strategically so Linda could maintain visual contact with Timothy through their kitchen window while she prepared his favorite lunch of grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles and creamy tomato soup served in his special blue bowl with cartoon dinosaurs painted around the rim. The Patterson family occupied a comfortable ranch-style home on Elm Street in Sunnydale Acres, a middle-class subdivision where children played outside freely and neighbors maintained genuine friendships built over years of shared barbecues, holiday celebrations, and mutual support during difficult times. The street was lined with mature Arizona ash trees that provided blessed relief from the desert sun, and the community had the rare quality of actual neighborly care that was becoming increasingly uncommon in modern America. David worked as a construction foreman for Phoenix Valley Builders, a respected local company specializing in custom residential development throughout the rapidly growing metropolitan area. Linda managed bookkeeping services for 3 small local businesses from their converted spare bedroom office, allowing her to maintain professional income while being available for Timothy's needs and school activities. Timothy's birth had come after years of fertility struggles, multiple medical consultations, and the emotional roller coaster of failed attempts to conceive, making his arrival an answered prayer that filled their lives with joy they had never thought possible. He was a precocious, energetic child with an insatiable curiosity about how things worked, an infectious laugh that could brighten anyone's mood, and the kind of innocent optimism that made adults remember why children were considered blessings. His favorite activities included building elaborate constructions in his sandbox, creating stories with his collection of toy trucks and construction vehicles, and helping David with simple home improvement projects that made him feel important and capable. On that fateful September morning, Linda had stepped inside for what she estimated was no more than 4 or 5 minutes to flip the grilled cheese sandwiches and stir the soup to prevent it from scorching. She could clearly hear Timothy's animated voice through the open kitchen window as he created elaborate narratives about the castles, roads, and imaginary cities he was constructing in the sand, complete with detailed sound effects for his toy bulldozers, dump trucks, and excavators that were his constant companions during outdoor play. The sandbox area was visible from multiple windows in their home, and Timothy had never wandered beyond their fenced yard without permission or supervision. When Linda returned to the window carrying Timothy's lunch plate, expecting to call him inside, the sandbox was empty except for his abandoned toys, scattered exactly where he had been playing with them moments before. His favorite red dump truck sat half buried in sand. A small plastic shovel lay beside an unfinished sand castle, and his blue baseball cap rested on the sandbox's wooden edge, where he had placed it when the morning sun grew too warm. The sudden silence was profound and unsettling. No laughter, no sound effects, no calls for attention, just an eerie quiet that immediately triggered Linda's maternal instincts that something was terribly wrong. Linda's initial response was to call Timothy's name while walking quickly through their house, checking his bedroom, the bathroom, the garage, and every possible hiding place where a 6-year-old might go to surprise his mother or avoid lunchtime. When these searches proved fruitless, she ran outside to check with neighbors, her voice becoming increasingly frantic as she called Timothy's name throughout the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson next door confirmed she had heard Timothy playing normally just minutes earlier, but had not seen him leave the yard or noticed any unusual activity or unfamiliar vehicles in the area. The 911 call was made at 12:47 p.m., exactly 1 hour and 12 minutes after Linda had last seen Timothy playing in his sandbox. Phoenix Police Patrol units arrived within minutes, followed shortly by Detective Maria Santos, a 15-year veteran of the Missing Persons Unit, who had built a reputation for thoroughness, compassion, and unwillingness to give up on difficult cases. Detective Santos immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation and began implementing protocols for potential child abduction cases, including establishing a command center, coordinating with federal authorities, and organizing systematic search efforts. Within hours, the Pattersons' quiet suburban street had been transformed into the epicenter of a massive search operation. FBI agents from the Phoenix field office arrived with specialized equipment and expertise in child abduction cases, bringing behavioral analysts, forensic specialists, and coordination resources for interstate investigations. The neighborhood was systematically sealed off as investigators conducted methodical interviews with every resident within a 6-block radius, searching for witnesses, suspicious activities, or anyone who might have relevant information about Timothy's disappearance. Before we continue with this heartbreaking story that would capture national attention and demonstrate the incredible power of parental love and community support, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Your engagement helps us continue sharing these important stories that remind us of both human resilience and the precious value of never giving up hope, even in the darkest circumstances. The immediate search effort mobilized resources on an unprecedented scale for the Phoenix metropolitan area. Hundreds of volunteers, including off-duty police officers, firefighters, emergency medical personnel, and concerned community members, organized into systematic search teams that combed through every inch of the surrounding Sonoran Desert landscape. Professional search and rescue helicopters, equipped with thermal imaging cameras and high-powered spotlights, flew carefully coordinated grid patterns over the vast wilderness areas surrounding the city, while specially trained K-9 units followed scent trails that mysteriously ended at the edge of the neighborhood, strongly suggesting that Timothy had been placed into a vehicle rather than wandering away on foot. The media response was immediate and extensive, with local television stations providing live coverage and national networks picking up the story within 24 hours. Timothy's photograph, showing his bright blue eyes, sandy brown hair with natural highlights from Arizona sunshine, and his characteristic gap-toothed smile that radiated pure childhood joy, appeared on television broadcasts, newspaper front pages, and thousands of flyers that were distributed across multiple states within the first week. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children immediately prioritized Timothy's case, adding his information to their comprehensive database and coordinating with law enforcement agencies throughout the southwestern United States. A reward fund, initially established with David and Linda's modest family savings of $8,000, grew exponentially as community donations poured in from people who had never met the Patterson family but were moved by their desperate situation and Timothy's innocent face smiling from missing child posters. Local businesses contributed services, materials, and financial support, while churches, schools, and civic organizations organized fundraising events and awareness campaigns that kept Timothy's case in the public consciousness. The investigation revealed no physical evidence of forced entry to the Patterson home, no signs of struggle in the yard or sandbox area, and no witnesses who had observed Timothy leaving the neighborhood or noticed suspicious vehicles in the area during the critical time period. The sandbox showed no unusual disturbance patterns beyond Timothy's normal play activities, and all of his toys remained positioned exactly where he had been using them, suggesting his departure had been sudden and unexpected. Security cameras were rare in residential neighborhoods in 1998, and the few that existed in surrounding commercial areas showed no relevant activity during the time frame of Timothy's disappearance. David and Linda's world completely disintegrated in the aftermath of their son's vanishing. David immediately took indefinite leave from his construction supervisor position, dedicating every waking moment to searching desert areas, following up on reported sightings, manning phones at the FBI command center, and coordinating with volunteer search teams. His normally methodical, calm demeanor transformed into obsessive urgency as he drove hundreds of miles daily, checking every possible location where a child might be hidden or abandoned, often searching until exhaustion forced him to stop. Linda's response was equally intense, but manifested differently as she became the organizational hub for media communications, volunteer coordination, and maintaining contact with law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions. She stopped eating regular meals and sleeping normal hours, losing 35 pounds in the first month as her body consumed itself under the stress of grief, anxiety, and relentless activity. Friends and family members took turns staying with Linda to ensure she maintained basic nutrition and rest, but nothing could alleviate the consuming fear and desperate hope that dominated her every thought. Their marriage, previously strong and mutually supportive through various life challenges, began showing serious strain as each parent processed grief and helplessness in fundamentally different ways. David channeled his emotions into physical searching and investigation activities, while Linda focused on communication, coordination, and maintaining hope through systematic organization of every possible resource and contact. They rarely slept in the same bed, ate meals together, or engaged in normal conversations unrelated to finding Timothy, creating emotional distance at the time they most needed mutual support. Detective Santos pursued every possible lead with methodical determination that impressed even experienced FBI agents assigned to the case. She personally coordinated with law enforcement agencies in California, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, and Colorado, maintaining Timothy's case as an active priority and ensuring his information remained current in national databases. Reported sightings came from shopping malls in Los Angeles, truck stops in rural Texas, theme parks in Florida, and even international locations. But each potential match resulted in crushing disappointment when investigated and ruled out. The detective also conducted extensive background investigations on registered sex offenders throughout Arizona, interviewed anyone who had access to the Sunnydale Acres neighborhood, and explored possibilities of family abduction, despite the fact that David and Linda had no estranged relatives, custody disputes, or known enemies. She coordinated with school officials, youth sports organizations, and community groups to identify anyone who might have had contact with Timothy or shown unusual interest in children in the area. As months evolved into years, the intensive daily search operations necessarily scaled back due to resource limitations and the need to address new cases. But the Patterson family never reduced their personal commitment to finding Timothy. They invested their entire life savings in hiring private investigators with specialized experience in missing children cases, traveled across the country to personally follow up on potential sightings and leads, and consulted with psychics, profilers, and alternative resources despite their initial skepticism about non-traditional investigative methods. By 2003, 5 years after Timothy's disappearance, David and Linda had refinanced their home twice to fund continued search efforts and had accumulated substantial credit card debt from travel expenses, investigation costs, and printing thousands of updated flyers with age progression photographs. Their financial situation had become precarious, forcing difficult decisions about how to balance the need for income with their unwillingness to abandon searching for their son. The psychological toll on both parents was severe and long-lasting, requiring professional intervention and ongoing support. Linda developed chronic insomnia that no medication could adequately address, anxiety disorders that made normal social interactions difficult, and episodes of depression that required careful monitoring and treatment. She converted their spare bedroom into a comprehensive investigation headquarters, covering every wall with detailed maps, timeline charts, photographs from different stages of the search, and extensive correspondence files with law enforcement agencies, missing children organizations, and potential witnesses from across the country. David returned to work out of absolute financial necessity, but found concentration and job performance severely impacted by the constant mental focus on Timothy's case. He frequently left construction sites to follow up on new leads, potential sightings, or meetings with investigators, creating tension with employers and co-workers who sympathized but needed reliable supervision. His physical health declined from irregular eating, inadequate sleep, and the stress of carrying emotional burdens that seemed to increase rather than diminish over time. Their social relationships gradually deteriorated as friends and extended family members struggled to provide meaningful support year after year without resolution or significant progress in the case. Well-meaning people often suggested that David and Linda should move on or accept reality, advice that demonstrated fundamental misunderstanding of parental bonds and the impossibility of abandoning a missing child. The couple became increasingly isolated, finding comfort primarily in support groups with other families of missing children who understood their experience. By 2008, 10 years after Timothy's disappearance, Detective Santos had been promoted to sergeant, but continued working the case as actively as department resources allowed. She regularly updated Timothy's age progression photographs using computer software and expert consultation, maintained his information in expanding national and international databases, and coordinated with new technologies and investigative methods as they became available. The case file had grown to multiple boxes containing thousands of pages of reports, interviews, evidence analysis, and correspondence. David and Linda had evolved into unofficial advocates and resources for other families dealing with missing children, providing practical advice, emotional support, and navigation assistance based on their painful expertise in dealing with law enforcement agencies, media relations, and the complex systems involved in missing persons investigations. Despite a decade of disappointment, they maintained Timothy's bedroom exactly as he had left it, regularly cleaning and organizing his toys, books, and clothes while preserving hope for his eventual return home. The breakthrough that would ultimately solve the 20-year mystery originated from an entirely unexpected source nearly 3,000 miles away in Portland, Oregon. Jennifer Walsh, a social worker with 12 years of experience in child welfare services and homeless assistance programs, was conducting routine intake interviews for a transitional housing program designed to help homeless individuals achieve stability and independent living. Among her clients was a young man named Michael, approximately 26 years old, who had been surviving on Portland streets since aging out of the foster care system with minimal life skills, no family connections, and no official identification documents. Michael's story was unfortunately typical of many young adults who had spent their formative years in institutional care systems. He had learned to survive through temporary employment, occasional shelter programs, food assistance, and the informal networks of support that exist among homeless populations. Despite his circumstances, Michael demonstrated intelligence, resilience, and a quiet dignity that impressed social workers who encountered him. He was soft-spoken, respectful, and genuinely motivated to improve his situation, making him an ideal candidate for programs designed to help homeless individuals transition to stable housing and employment. During the detailed intake process required for housing assistance, Jennifer noticed Michael's distinctive physical characteristics, particularly a crescent-shaped scar above his left eyebrow that appeared to result from a childhood injury. As someone who had volunteered extensively with missing children organizations and maintained active involvement in child welfare advocacy, Jennifer had developed an exceptional memory for physical details mentioned in case files and missing persons reports. Something about Michael's facial features, combined with his estimated age and the distinctive scar, triggered a vague memory that compelled her to investigate further. Jennifer spent several hours during her off-duty time searching through online databases maintained by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, focusing particularly on cases involving children who would currently be in their mid-20s. The process was time-consuming and emotionally difficult, as each case file represented a family's ongoing tragedy and unanswered questions. When she discovered Timothy Patterson's case file, the physical similarities were immediately apparent despite the 20-year age difference and the obvious effects of prolonged homelessness on Michael's appearance. The case file included detailed descriptions of Timothy's physical characteristics, including the crescent-shaped scar above his left eyebrow that had resulted from a childhood fall from his tricycle when he was 4 years old. Age progression photographs showed remarkable similarity to Michael's current facial structure, bone structure, and overall appearance. Though years of inconsistent nutrition, exposure to weather, and the stress of survival had aged him beyond his chronological years, Jennifer's training and experience told her this was potentially significant, but she also understood the need for careful verification and proper procedures. Jennifer contacted the Portland Police Department's Missing Persons Unit, explaining her observations and requesting assistance in pursuing the potential connection. Portland detectives, working in coordination with Phoenix authorities and FBI agents who had maintained involvement in Timothy's case, arranged for comprehensive DNA testing using proper chain of custody procedures. The process required several weeks due to coordination between multiple jurisdictions, legal requirements for consent and documentation, and the need for thorough analysis to ensure accurate results. During the waiting period for DNA results, Jennifer continued working with Michael while carefully preparing him for the possibility that he might have family members who had been searching for him for decades. This preparation was emotionally delicate, as Michael had lived his entire conscious life believing he was completely alone in the world, with no family connections or personal history beyond his fragmented memories of foster care placements and survival on the streets. The DNA analysis confirmed Jennifer's remarkable intuition. Michael was definitively identified as Timothy Patterson, the child who had vanished from his parents' front yard in Phoenix 20 years earlier. The laboratory results were verified through multiple independent tests to ensure accuracy, and the findings were immediately communicated to Detective Santos in Phoenix, who had never closed Timothy's case or stopped hoping for exactly this kind of breakthrough. Detective Santos, now a sergeant with nearly 30 years of experience, personally called David and Linda Patterson with the incredible news that their son had been found alive. The phone call, made on a cold January evening in 2019, represented the end of 20 years of uncertainty, fear, and desperate hope. Linda later described hearing those words as simultaneously the most joyful and terrifying moment of her life. Joy that Timothy was alive, terror about what he had endured, and whether they could rebuild any meaningful relationship after so many years of separation. The story of how Timothy had survived and ended up living anonymously in Portland began to emerge through careful interviews conducted by trained social workers, psychologists, and law enforcement specialists experienced in trauma recovery. Michael's earliest clear memory dated to approximately 2000, when he was discovered wandering alone at a truck stop near Las Vegas, Nevada, severely malnourished, traumatized, and completely unable to provide any information about his identity, family, or how he had arrived at that location. Nevada Child Protective Services had responded to the truck stop incident by placing the unidentified child in emergency foster care while conducting extensive efforts to determine his identity and locate his family. Despite thorough investigations, they were unable to connect him with any missing persons reports, and he was eventually entered into Nevada's foster care system under the assumption that he was an abandoned child rather than an abducted one whose family was desperately searching for him. The failure to connect the Nevada foster child with the missing persons reports for Timothy Patterson appeared to result from systematic communication breakdowns between different agencies, jurisdictions, and databases. Interstate information sharing between child welfare agencies and law enforcement missing persons systems was inadequate in 2000, particularly for cases involving children who might have crossed multiple state lines or been held for extended periods before abandonment. The technology and protocols for cross-referencing information between different agencies and states were primitive compared to current standards. Michael had spent his formative years from age 8 through 18 moving through various foster homes, group homes, and temporary placements throughout Nevada and Oregon. Some placements had been genuinely caring and supportive, providing stability, education, and positive role models, while others had been merely adequate institutional care focused on basic needs rather than emotional development. A few placements had been problematic or even harmful, contributing to his difficulty trusting adults and forming stable relationships. The transition to independent living at 18 had been particularly challenging, as Michael aged out of the foster care system with minimal practical life skills, no family support network, and no knowledge of his true identity or background. He had struggled with employment, housing, and social connections, eventually becoming homeless during economic difficulties and remaining on the streets for several years before connecting with social services programs designed to help individuals achieve stability. The reunion between Michael and his parents was carefully orchestrated by professional counselors and social workers at the Portland Police Department on a cold January morning in 2019. David and Linda Patterson had driven through the night from Phoenix, afraid to stop or sleep, for fear that this incredible development might somehow disappear or prove to be another devastating false lead. Their emotions during the drive ranged from overwhelming joy and anticipation to terror about what condition they might find their son in after 20 years of unknown experiences. When they first saw Michael in the police department conference room, the recognition was immediate and overwhelming, despite his dramatically altered appearance from the 6-year-old child they remembered. He was thin and weathered from years of inconsistent nutrition, exposure to harsh weather conditions, and the physical demands of survival on the streets. His hands bore scars from manual labor and difficult living conditions. His clothing was worn but clean, and his eyes held the guarded expression of someone who had learned to be cautious about trusting others or accepting help. Despite these changes caused by time and circumstances, David and Linda could clearly see their son in Michael's facial features, bone structure, and especially in the crescent-shaped scar above his left eyebrow that had been caused by his childhood tricycle accident. His mannerisms, the way he held his hands, and certain expressions were hauntingly familiar, triggering powerful memories of the child they had lost and confirming what the DNA tests had already proven scientifically. The initial reunion was emotionally overwhelming for all parties involved, requiring careful management by trained professionals who understood the complexity of the situation. David and Linda wept openly as they looked at their son for the first time in 20 years, while Michael struggled to process the reality that he had parents who had never stopped searching for him and had sacrificed everything to find him. The young man who had lived his entire conscious life believing he was completely alone in the world was suddenly confronted with evidence of a family, a previous life, and people who had loved him unconditionally despite his absence. Professional counselors and psychologists facilitated the early interactions between Michael and his parents, helping to establish appropriate boundaries and realistic expectations for the relationship-building process that would be necessary. Michael agreed to participate in regular supervised visits and counseling sessions, though he experienced significant anxiety and confusion about his identity, his place in this newly discovered family structure, and the overwhelming responsibility of living up to his parents' expectations after they had invested so much hope and sacrifice in finding him. David and Linda faced the heartbreaking reality that the son they had recovered was not the innocent 6-year-old who had disappeared from their front yard, but a traumatized young adult who had survived experiences they could barely imagine and who needed support in ways they had never anticipated. The reunion was simultaneously the answer to 20 years of prayers and the beginning of an entirely new set of challenges that would require patience, professional guidance, and unconditional love without expectations. Comprehensive psychological evaluation revealed that Michael was likely suffering from dissociative amnesia, a condition where severe traumatic experiences cause complete memory loss of specific time periods as a protective psychological mechanism. The exact circumstances of what had happened to Timothy during the approximately 2 years between his disappearance from Phoenix and his discovery at the Nevada truck stop remained a complete mystery that might never be solved. Law enforcement investigators theorized that Timothy had been abducted by someone who had later abandoned him when the extensive search efforts, media coverage, and national attention made keeping him too dangerous or difficult. The period between 1998 and 2000 represented a complete blank in Timothy's memory, suggesting experiences so traumatic that his young mind had essentially erased them entirely to enable psychological survival. The gradual process of rebuilding family relationships required extensive professional guidance and infinite patience from all parties involved. Michael began attending regular therapy sessions with specialists experienced in trauma recovery, identity issues, and family reunification to help him process his recovered identity and deal with the psychological impact of learning about his lost childhood, his family, and the 20 years of searching that had preceded their reunion. David and Linda also engaged in counseling to help them adjust to the reality that their recovered son was not the child they had lost, but an adult stranger who shared their genetic material and needed their support in ways they had never imagined. They had to learn to manage their expectations, respect Michael's autonomy and boundaries, and build a relationship based on current realities rather than memories of a 6-year-old child. Over the following months, small fragments of childhood memory began returning to Michael in dreams, triggered responses to familiar stimuli, and sudden flashes of recognition that were both precious and painful. He remembered the distinctive texture and smell of the sandbox sand, the sound of Linda's voice calling him for meals, the feeling of David's strong hands steadying him while learning to ride his first bicycle in their driveway, and the taste of his favorite grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles. These recovered memories, though treasured by his parents as proof of their enduring connection, also brought waves of grief for all the lost years, missed experiences, milestones, and shared moments they could never recover or recreate. Timothy's first steps, first words, birthdays, holidays, school achievements, and thousands of daily interactions that form the foundation of family relationships had been stolen and could never be replaced. David and Linda had never moved from their Phoenix home, maintaining Timothy's bedroom exactly as he had left it on that September morning in 1998. The room had become a carefully preserved shrine of hope, with toys arranged precisely on shelves, clothes hanging in the closet organized by size and season, books stacked on the nightstand, and even art projects from kindergarten displayed on walls. When Michael first saw his childhood bedroom during his first visit to Phoenix, he was overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't fully understand, process, or articulate. The toys, furniture, decorations, and personal items felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, like remnants from someone else's life that somehow belonged to him. A stuffed elephant named Peanuts triggered a powerful emotional response he couldn't explain, while his collection of toy construction vehicles seemed both completely unknown and strangely comforting. The preservation of his childhood space was simultaneously touching evidence of his parents' love and an overwhelming reminder of everything he had lost and could never recover. The healing process was neither linear nor predictable, involving significant setbacks, emotional conflicts, and periods when Michael would disappear for days or weeks, overwhelmed by the intensity of reconnecting with his past and the pressure of living up to his parents' expectations and hopes. David and Linda learned to give him space and respect his need for independence while maintaining their unwavering support and availability, understanding that their son needed to process 20 years of separation, trauma, and identity confusion at his own pace. There were arguments about boundaries, expectations, and the pace of relationship building. Michael struggled with guilt over not remembering people who had sacrificed everything for him, anxiety about disappointing parents who had idealized him during his absence, and confusion about his identity as both Michael the survivor and Timothy the lost child. David and Linda wrestled with their own grief over lost time, frustration with the slow pace of reconnection, and fear that they might lose him again if they pushed too hard or expected too much too quickly. Detective Santos, now preparing for retirement after 30 years with the Phoenix Police Department, was present for the reunion and later described it as the most emotionally significant moment of her entire law enforcement career. The case that had haunted her professional and personal life for 2 decades was finally resolved, bringing closure to a family she had worked with through their darkest period and demonstrating that persistence, hope, and dedication could sometimes achieve the impossible. However, the larger mystery of exactly what had happened to Timothy during those first 2 missing years remained unsolved, and would likely remain so unless new evidence, witnesses, or information emerged. The investigation into his disappearance was officially closed as resolved, but the criminal case regarding his abduction remained open and active, with investigators hoping that Timothy's recovery and the renewed attention to the case might generate new leads about who had taken him and what had occurred during his captivity. The Patterson family's story quickly became national news and a powerful beacon of hope for other families dealing with missing children cases. Media coverage focused on the incredible persistence of parents who never gave up, the importance of interagency cooperation and communication, and the possibility that other missing children might be living unidentified in foster care systems or homeless populations across the country. Linda began speaking at conferences, workshops, and training sessions for law enforcement, social workers, and missing children organizations, sharing their experience and advocating for improved communication systems between missing children databases and foster care agencies. She worked with legislators, child welfare organizations, and technology companies to develop protocols, databases, and procedures that would prevent other children from falling through systematic cracks, as Timothy had. Her advocacy efforts focus particularly on improving interstate information sharing, standardizing identification procedures for unidentified children entering care systems, and ensuring that missing children cases remained active and accessible to child welfare workers who might encounter them years or decades later. Linda's expertise, earned through 20 years of navigating these systems, made her an effective advocate for systematic improvements that could prevent other families from enduring similar ordeals. David established a non-profit foundation called Never Stop Looking to provide long-term support and resources for families of missing children, particularly those whose cases had gone cold after initial investigation periods or whose financial resources had been exhausted by extended search efforts. The foundation offered grants for ongoing investigation costs, emotional support services, advocacy assistance, and practical resources for families dealing with the unique challenges of missing children cases. The foundation also funded research into improved investigation techniques, supported technology development for better information sharing between agencies, and provided training resources for law enforcement and social service personnel who might encounter missing children in their work. David's construction background proved valuable in organizing volunteers, managing resources efficiently, and building sustainable programs that could provide assistance for years rather than months. Michael slowly but steadily began building a genuine relationship with his parents, though the process remained complicated by the fact that they were essentially strangers who shared an unbreakable biological bond and a traumatic history that none of them fully understood. He continued struggling with guilt over not remembering people who had sacrificed everything to find him, anxiety about living up to their expectations after they had invested so much hope in his return, and confusion about integrating his identity as both Michael, the street survivor, and Timothy, the beloved lost child. As months evolved into years, Michael began showing increasing interest in learning about his lost childhood, the family he couldn't remember, and the community that had supported his parents throughout their search. Linda spent countless hours sharing photograph albums that documented his early years, telling stories about his personality, interests, and achievements as a young child, and helping him understand the bright, curious, affectionate boy he had been before his disappearance changed everything. David focused on teaching Michael practical life skills and knowledge he had missed during his chaotic youth in foster care and on the streets. They worked together on basic automotive maintenance, home repair projects, financial planning, and navigation of bureaucratic systems that most people learn gradually throughout their lives. David also shared stories about their father-son activities, Timothy's early interest in construction and building projects, and the dreams they had shared about working together when Timothy grew up. The young man who had learned to survive independently on dangerous streets and who had been disappointed by adults throughout his life gradually began trusting in his parents' consistent support, unconditional acceptance, and genuine love without expectations or demands for emotional responses he wasn't ready to provide. 2 years after their reunion, Michael made the deeply symbolic decision to legally change his name back to Timothy Patterson, though he continued using Michael in his daily life and employment as a bridge between his two identities and life experiences. Timothy found stable employment, working with David's construction company, discovering that he had indeed inherited his father's natural aptitude for building, problem-solving, and working with tools and materials. The physical nature of construction work appealed to him after years of survival-focused activities, and the structured environment provided stability and purpose that had been missing from his life. Working alongside his father also created opportunities for relationship building through shared activities rather than intense, emotional conversations that sometimes overwhelmed him. Today, more than 5 years after their reunion, the Patterson family continues the ongoing process of healing and growing together while acknowledging that their relationships will always be shaped by the 20 years of separation and trauma they all endured. Timothy maintains his own apartment and has developed a stable routine that includes regular family contact, steady employment, and gradually expanding social connections, though he continues to struggle with trust issues and anxiety that may always be part of his life experience. Linda finally sleeps through the night without medication for the first time in over 20 years, though she maintains active involvement in missing children advocacy and continues providing support for other families dealing with similar situations. The spare bedroom that had served as investigation headquarters for 2 decades has been converted back to its original purpose, though she maintains organized files and resources that continue to be valuable for her advocacy work and assistance to other families. David has returned to coaching youth baseball for the first time since Timothy's disappearance, finding joy in working with children and young people while honoring the memory of the childhood experiences he and Timothy never had the opportunity to share. His construction business has grown to include several employees, and he takes particular satisfaction in providing stable employment and skills training for young adults who have aged out of foster care systems. Their story serves as both a testament to the unbreakable bond between parents and children and a powerful reminder that hope should never be abandoned, even when cases seem hopeless. Years pass without answers or progress, and well-meaning people suggest that acceptance and moving forward are more realistic than continued searching. The Patterson family's experience demonstrates that love transcends time, trauma, and circumstances, and that families can be rebuilt and relationships restored even after the most devastating separations and losses. The case also highlights the critical importance of systematic improvements in communication between agencies, the need for comprehensive identification procedures for unidentified children, and the possibility that other missing children may be living unknown in institutional care systems or on the margins of society, waiting to be recognized and reunited with families who have never stopped searching for them.